Good evening. Welcome to Investigator News, and this is Legends and Myths and Monsters. And tonight's Robin Hood. Boy, he's kind of one of my favorites. I grew up watching just about all of the Robin Hoods that was out there for movies. Now, I gotta say, Men in Tights was about the best, and I really did like that. I don't the Kevin Costner thing that was pretty good, but Men in Tights that was really good. Um, so put down in the comments what's your favorite Robin Hood movie. Now, is he real? Karen, what do you think? You think he's real? I looked hard into this one. I had to go way back. And, there's a lot of poems about him, and there's a lot of, uh, you go all the way back, and it's like more so and so told so and so, and it was passed, and there could have been a Robin Hood, but he wasn't from Sherwood. And I was like, what? He's not from Sherwood Forest. We got a Sherwood, Arkansas here. I bet you he hung out there. It's pretty dense woods. Uh, we once heard I believe we had a Black Panther roaming around. We do have them here, the Black Panthers, but we're on to Robin Hood. Karen, what do you think? You think we got Robin Hood? Do you think he's real? We're going to have to find out tonight. And mine was no. When I first looked into it, I said, it's a beautiful story, and him and Maid Marian, and getting rid of the horrible king, and um, he liked the Kevin Costner one. Now, Kevin Costner, I like Dances with Wolves. I liked him with that one, but nah, I kind of like the Men in Tights. But I'm a Monty Python lover. I like Monty Python. Uh, you know, what is it? The Life of Brian, and then there was a Holy Grail one, and I like funny stuff. Maybe that's why I crack a lot of jokes. So Robin Hood, is he real? We're gonna find out tonight, and pretty much. Sherwood Forest, huh? We have to kind of look at Sherwood Forest because if you go back, that's where it says he's from. But there can't be many characters from history who we can immediately identify just by saying a place name. But, you know, um, all of you will realize this is going to be all about Robin Hood tonight. Like I said, throw in the comments your favorite. Some even go way back into the black and white ones that they like. And like, I would like to know, Linda, if Linda and Linda come in, I'd like to know what their favorites were. They're a little older than us, and they got to see the 50s and the 60s and the 70s version. So everyone knows the story. He's basically the most famous character in history. I thought King Arthur or Merlin, but they're saying no because everybody knows the story of Robin Hood. But what was he really like? Did he actually exist? Now, I'm going to try to establish this. He was the most celebrated outlaw of all time, and not just a comic book character or flesh and blood historical figure. Was that it? I've always had the fascination with Robin, so this is something of a personal quest. And we all feel we know the famous outlaw, and we know he robbed from the rich and gave to the poor, and maybe that's why he's our hero. And he comes in all kinds of shapes and sizes, I would say. And the pictures of him we've had since childhood. Not only that, but the Three Musketeers was the other one that we all grew up with. And it may be a long way from the truth. Now, in the dictionary of national biography, Robin Hood is the only figure who didn't exist, it says. Huh. Now, I read that and I said, no, wait a minute now. You didn't even give me any facts. You didn't even say that there was no Sherwood or something. And so he certainly robbed from the rich, but he never got around to giving to the poor. 1,000 men could not find an outlaw if he didn't want to be found in Sherwood Forest. So some years ago, um, I was looking at, the Kevin Costner one that Karen likes, and Maid Marian and Her Merry Men. It kind of paired with Robin Hood stories that we all know from TV and movies. And so, who'd have thought Robin Hood and his team of mastermind finalists? But what we think of is traditional isn't. The modern Robin Hood story is the product of centuries of change. We've seen uh, Robin of Locksley. We've seen the Crusades to find lands that was stolen by evil Prince John and his henchmen, the Sheriff of Nottingham, and it's a master Robin Hood. Um, he flees to the Greenwood and fights with his merry men, stealing from the rich and giving to the poor. And you go to around by the Fair Bank, and we'll meet up with uh, where we meet up with the fact that there is a well that I did find, and I couldn't find no pictures of it, but there is a well over there called Robin Hood's Well, and I seen the picture, and I was like, it looks like a gazebo, and I was like, that's a well. Karen, I don't know if you've ever seen it. Um, um, what I started doing was I said, okay, if there's a well, there's got to be something to it. Well, then there's all these different places all over, not around Sherwood, but all these little items and uh, rest stops, and there was all kinds of stuff that Robin Hood this, Robin Hood that. And so you would kind of wonder over there, there's got to be a Robin Hood. And, so I went kind of back and looked at King Richard the Lionheart, because then, there you go. And he returns from the Holy Land. So I figured there got to be something in that. It's a great story, but a red herring as far as tracking down the real Robin Hood goes with Lionheart. If we want the flesh and blood, then we're going to have to look for the original story. Now, the earliest version were ballads. Now, remember I said a bunch of poems? Now we know we found one back all the way back to 1377. And so this is where we start seeing that uh, Robin Hood's um, the real evidence of him. And a man of, well, it's like that be a free bode blowed. I shall tell ye, good yemen, and his name was Hode. Robin Hood. Robin was a proud outlaw, whilst he walked the ground. The earliest fiction is exciting. I read that and I was like, these and thous and yemens and Robin Hood. I said, well, Robin Hood. It should be Robin Hood. But there's many modern versions, but I didn't want to look at that. But it doesn't offer any clues about Robin Hood, how he became an outlaw, though. The tale opens abruptly at his camp, okay? So we know from the poems and the ye's and the thous and the these, but do you guys, does that, I know the Bible does that. Now I'm okay with that, but when it comes to poems, I'm like, Robin Hood's got to be better than a poem. And so basically, we were looking at about 1377. Now I thought it's got to be earlier than that. So I'm thinking 1200. And I started looking at who the kings were over there. And so there is a tale that opens abruptly at his camp that I found. And he's there with only three of the usual suspects, Little John, Will Scarlet, and Much, the miller's son. And they're preparing a meal, and Robin's hungry, but he won't eat until all of his guests have. And he sends the men off to lie in wait by the great north road to catch a fellow dinner. Hooves thundering. They don't have to wait long before the wailing of the thoroughbred knight, of course. Um, Robert offers the knight his hospitality. And then once he's eaten, he tells him he's got to pay for his meal. Ooh, boy, that's a cheap thing to do. But emerges that the knight is penniless and his son has killed a man. And in order to pay the heavy fine, the knight's taken on a vast loan from the monks of the St. Mary's in York. Unless he repays the debt tomorrow, he stands to lose everything he owns. Because the knight has been honest, Robin sends him on his way uh, with money to pay the debt because he's robbed from the rich and he's going to give to the poor. And trusting that the Virgin Mary will pay him back, on top of that, he gives the knight a new set of clothes and a good horse and sends little John to accompany him to York. Now um, this is a ballad, folks. It was written as kind of like they say it's a song, but when I went to look, there's nothing there. And so I'm taking it as the ballad is a story or a poem. Um, hey, Mary. Uh-oh. Don't worry about the uh-ohs. So when you read the ballad, you start to notice that it's very different from the version we know today. Robin here isn't a nobleman. He has outlaws and he's born a freeman. But most obviously, in the setting, it's not Sherwood Forest. And so this is where the poem in the forest, traditionally known as Barnesdale or South Yorkshire. And yes, too bad. Who was it? Didn't we have someone from, no, it was, I think, my game group that was over there. And I know quite a few over in the UK. And it'd be nice to know what they think. So perhaps we'll be surprised that Robin Hood's a Yorkshireman, and it depends on the background. Historians have known this for a couple good years. The problem is the other outlaws, perhaps living around Nottingham and Sherwood Forest, their stories uh, with original ballads which don't come from this area. So I was learning that maybe Robin Hood wasn't even from Sherwood Forest. And that kind of like, am I looking at the wrong Robin Hood? And the fact that Nottingham is a better known place than Wentbridge or Barnesdale. Now, what I'm finding out is that's where Robin Hood was from. Wentbridge and Barnesdale, which most people, be frank, have never heard of outside this area. And would it help the Nottingham connection? The ballad is very, very specific about the area. This track is a remnant of Great North Road. It dipped down into Barnesdale to cross the river, and it went to Wentbridge. Today, the bypass, Wentbridge, is a half a mile to the east. And so, what we're looking at is now that the merry men laid their ambush, this is a spot where Little John will Scarlet lie in wait for the night in the poem. Robin sends to the cell to spy on Wentbridge. And you could see just beyond the white buildings, um, they say that snaking down Wentbridge from the other side of the valley. Basically, I think the writer really knew what exactly was going on with this Robin Hood. And I didn't like the Robin Hood. So he knew the area very well, and he knew things that maybe we didn't. And he knew it was a perfect lookout point. And it was surprised some people to hear the Robin Hood stories of this man. And coming here from not from Sherwood. Now, 6 centuries ago, it wouldn't have raised an eyebrow. The phrase Robin Hood in Barnesdale stood. It was a legal saying, and the people around there that are well established said yes. According to some of the historians that have went there, like in the last 20, 30 years, they say, yes, it's well established. It is a fact that Robin Hood was actually uh, from Barnesdale. So that's a new one. We always thought Sherwood. And a couple of miles down from there is further proof of Yorkshire claims that this is where the Robin Hood's well is. This is near Sherbrooke. And it's the cover of the 18th century architect. Van Buren designed it. The landmark been moved to make way for a carriageway or the highway, basically. And people have stopped there to celebrate Robin Hood for they say for hundreds of years. This is the earliest known place that's associated with Robin Hood. But over the next 3 centuries, the name the name starts cropping all over the place. Robin Hood's Bay near Whitby, Robin Hood's um, in Cumbria, Robin Hood's Walk in Richmond, Surrey, practically everywhere except Sherwood. So the first name doesn't appear until 1700, and they're jumping on the bandwagon at least 4 centuries after the event. So we've got tales in Barnesdale, not Sherwood. Robin's not a disposed nobleman, but a low-born Yorkshire man. What else do the original stories tell us about him? Um, that he was a gentle knight to Little John, and he began saying, "Tomorrow I must go to Yorktown, to St. Mary's Abbey, the abbot of monks of St. Mary Abbey, York, Abbey in York." And they're hoping that um, they're not, they're hoping the knight will fail to show up, and the knights only got until sunset to repay his vast debt. And after that, they claim his property and land. If that doesn't come the very day, uh, the disherit shall be, it says. But in the nick of time, the knight arrives, expecting him to be empty handed, and the abbot shows him no respect and leaves him kneeling like a servant. And he gets the shock when the knight hands over the full 400 pounds of his debt. It seems though that everything is square, but there's a twist. Back in Greenswood, Robin sends his men on a carbon copy of their first ambush. Lo and behold, this is their dinner, their dinner guest. It's none other than the monk from St. Mary's. Unlike a knight, the monk pleads poverty, but is found to have 800 pounds with him. The knight told the truth, and basically, the knight told the truth, but the monk lied. And so he lost everything because he was jingling his coins, as he was saying he was penniless. And so justice prevails, and Robin doubles his money. But there's no mention of giving to the poor. Our hero's just a bunch of highway robbers, if you can imagine that. Um, so they're robbing the rich and giving to the poor. Or maybe we had the wrong one. He almost certainly robbed the rich and kept it. But as we see, he did feel sorry for the knight and did give him the money and the horse and the new set of clothes, and they did feed him. So to me, that's the story says he didn't rob from the rich and give to the poor, but in this poem I'm looking at, hey, he did take care of this guy. So so robbing the rich and giving to the poor was basically, they say, a product of a much later version. The Robin of Ballads is a bit of a thug. In the poem, he kills a man, puts the head on a bow staff, and mutilates his face. Oh, shame on you, Robin Hood. Did anybody know about that story? I don't think Kevin Costner would have done that. So the original Robin Hood is pretty vicious. He's basically a vicious character. But then again, in the Middle Ages, when people were pretty being entertained by early ballads and stories, I mean, look at the Grimm's fairy tales. So to me, this was kind of like a Grimm's fairy tale with a kind of a Robin Hood twist. And they would expect to find the vicious character as a hero, they say. And when the people were basically entertained by this, it's just because this is all they had. They had the writings and the storytellers. So just because somebody went around lopping people's heads off and stealing from the people, as long as you went around killing the people, it didn't matter how he did it. The problem was Robin Hood was supposed to be this hero, and Robin he did pick on men of the cloth in particular. We hear he did not trust the monks. So St. Mary's really does exist, okay? So that was here in York. But don't be fooled by the romantic ruins. It was just more like a religious institution. So York was the second most powerful political center in the country. And the monks who ran the abbeys like these, they were politicians, captains, and businessmen. So the monks weren't really, they say, men of the cloth back then. They were more like the politicians and captains that would go around with the kings and decide on their political power and what they would do. Um, as well as being in charge of the spiritual welfare of the country. The abbeys of North England controlled the wool trade, and the money was supposed to be the men's uh, means to an end of supporting life of prayer, but wealth, and led to basically um, these no, not really noblemen, but these robbers found that the kings were overtaxing. They were taking the money. So these robbers would wait and they would take the money back, and then supposedly they'd help the people. I think that's what they say, that's where they think the story of Robin Hood actually came from. Now, Robin's portrayed as a fair and truly, mostly religious. Now, he may be a criminal, but his rough justice restores his true values. When Robin mugged the monk from St. Mary's, a great cheer came up amongst the people. And the ordinary bloke Robin gave a striking blow to the justice system and true religion, due to the facts the monks weren't very religious. Everyone knew the system was rotten. Sounds like Karen. Doesn't this sound like kind of our thing, where we got some rotten um, religious figures that are just ripping people off? Yeah, many churches have been caught doing that. But it's odd, folks, when we look back at this, that the churches were actually the politicians and the be like mayors of these little villages, and then of course the king. So everyone knew the system was rotten. They did. And so far, the original version of Robin stories has given us a good general picture of the sort of hard bitten character we're looking for. Um, and not only that, but then we have to look where he comes face to face with his enemy, and that's the Sheriff Nottingham. To find out the facts about the real Robin Hood, we've been looking at the earliest fictional versions of his legends, which was a ballad, and where he's lopping heads and robbing monks and um, chasing down knights. These medieval tales explode the myth of a penniless nobleman in Sherwood in favor of a much tougher and out and out criminal based in Yorkshire. But these stories and these ancient texts also have contained a little bit of evidence portraying to the real flesh and blood of Robin Hood, um, where archers are good and free. Robin and his men are brilliant archers. This is what we've come to find out. Now, the Sheriff of Nottingham organizes competitions to trap them. despite wearing their hoods. The sheriff knows that whoever splits the wand to the wind must be an outlaw. And because they were the outlaws were the best archers in the land. So if they were, what they would do is they would get like almost look like a noose, from what I'm finding out, and then they put a pin through it. And if they could hit that pin, then they knew that they were um, basically the hoodlums of the valley. And if they able to nick it or hit the rope, then they knew they were just very good archers. Um, so, um, so when Robin Hood basically hit the wood, they cried out on Robin Hood with that basically um, he was a robber, he was a thief, and of course. After that, he realized when he went to these competitions that he didn't want the crowd to turn on him. So, of course, he decided he would never succeed. And of course, the outlaw always escapes just in the nick of time. And there's chases, there's fights, there's escapes from prison that he had, and the feud with the sheriff, and also in a showdown. Now, Robin takes his arch enemy with one single shot when it came down to the final duel, and then moves in for the kill. And of course, he beheads the sheriff with his sword. So, so when we looked at this Robin Hood of the story, and that was closer to, it was in between 1200 and 1377. So, um, so it really matched up with that ballad. So we're looking at, okay, this could be the Robin Hood we're looking at, but it only said Robin, and it wasn't Robin. It's Robyn is how they spelled it. Uh, so this story here with this sheriff, and he ended up this duel in the sheriff and him being the great archer. It started really fitting because then he also had men. It wasn't merry men, it was men that assisted him in the story. And so basically, um, they had a Sir Richard back then as the king, which sounds really close to the original story. Now, next, King Edward himself comes to assort with these rebels in the north, and these men disguised themselves as monks. He deliberately gets captured in the forest, but when he sees Robin's loyal subject, he forgives all the outlaws and he takes Robin into his service. And he said, "My lord, the King of England," which leaves us with a puzzle. The modern, uh, because what it says in the story is the king says he left him with a puzzle because are you a good archer or are you a bad archer? Because the king was going to bring him in as one of his um, part of his military because they used bows back then, and he was good, but he says he's very puzzled. Are you a good man or are you a bad man? And so it says basically the King of England ended up hiring him as a servant, more or less. And the modern Robin story is set in the reign of Richard the Lionheart. Now, the evidence in the ballads suggests this is all wrong. The ballads say that Robin met with an entirely different king. Edward is the king. Now, there have been 8 Edwards who've ruled Britain through the ages. The first mention of the ballads is in the year 1377. So that rules all the kings out because Edward V didn't come to the throne until the 15th century. So using logic, Robin must have been around 1274 when Edward I comes to throne. and 1377 when we get the first mention of the ballads. Okay, see what I'm saying? So this is where when I was looking into this, it made a lot of sense because uh, they're mentioning this Robin being a good archer. Granted, he was doing some bad things, but it fits, except for the king was wrong. It was Edward. And there's another blindly obvious piece of evidence that supports that dating. It's the one thing that many other Robin Hoods is famous for. It's the rise of the bow, the long bow, and it's called nowadays. That's what it's called nowadays. And it began to take off in the 12th and 13th century, and that's when you have to basically. It's that's when it got to have permeated through the villages and through the towns and begun to become integrated into the communities and basically commons man's uh, sport. But not only that, but it was also considered a religious sport. That's what surprised me. And so I had to look up what is a religious sport. And when you look it up, it kind of some of it refers back to um, the archery in England. Back, they say, in the 13th, 12th, 13th to 14th centuries. So this does make a lot of sense. Now, in Richard the Lionheart's reign, the bow was a minority weapon. There was no cult of the long bowmen. So Edward the First, Second, and Third made the bow a key part of their military strategy. Now, archery. The reason I look so hard into it because that's what Robin used. And if you guys remember the movie, he was a sharpshooter basically. And so it was basically every able-bodied man was an archer back then. And it was like a football star is today. If you got the eye, the strength, you could do business with a bow. You were really one of the best in the community. And not only that, but a marksman. And what I found out, when they show that they like shoot the bows up into the air and do that, it wasn't, from what I was seeing during the war back then, they really didn't do that. They just had really good sharpshooters. They didn't hope the arrow would hit. They were aiming at the other side. And so I found that very interesting. And so the early 14th century, the closer examination of these ballads lead to an exact date. And historians have looked closely at the lives of the three Edwards, who are potentially candidates for this king. And they've come to the conclusion that one of them could possibly have been face to face with an outlaw in this area in the year of 1323. And Edward II went on tour the north end of Nottingham. So I felt, hey, there we go. There's Nottingham. Here's a king. We got the archers. It's back in 1323. Um, so because of the political crisis that started at the Pontefract Castle, Pontefract is West Yorkshire. It was confusing. It was confusingly the home to Thomas, the Earl of Lancaster, the cousin of King Edward II. And the king's unpopular. And Lancaster decided to make his own bid from the throne. He called up his men from Yorkshire and Lancashire to form an army. But as they moved out of Pontefract, Edward ambushed them and crushed the rebels. And so the Earl of Lancaster was tried and beheaded for this. His followers were outlawed and fled for their lives in places like Barnesdale. The Lancasterian revolt provides a plausible explanation as to why Robin Hood and his men would have been outlaws. So you see in that, he became that early on. And when the king decided to be a vicious and killed people, then Robin Hood and his men fled to the woods, so they wouldn't be captured, and they were considered bad guys. And it also connects to Robin to Nottingham through the villain of this piece. The period of the revolt was only the time that Sheriff of Nottingham was also responsible for Yorkshire, and he had been the king's right hand man in fighting the rebels. So the Lancastrian rebel also explains other possibilities. The poor knight who Robin Hood originally held up is a reoccurring character in all of the stories. So, and that was the other thing I found out. It was like, hey, here we go. And it's only the early stories, though. As you go on and it starts getting into um, um, 1900s, and the story started changing. It was more of a love story with Maid Marian, and so it really does fit. And when the outlaws are fleeing from the sheriff and they run to the castle for protection, the knight's name is the Sir Richard of Lee. So here we got a Richard. And this is where the ballad says he was from, Lee of Wyresdale. And this is Lancashire, and several days from Barnesdale, where Robin was based. So at first glance, it seems pretty plausible to have a leading character for so far away, but it actually makes pretty good sense. And there was a Plumpton and Wyresdale are linked with Barnesdale. And through the lands of Thomas Earl of Lancaster, they formed a corridor right across from the Pennies, and allowing for the communication between rebels here and there, they say, basically. And the knight based in Ryresdale could have been the brother in arms to the outlaw in Barnesdale. And so the revolt is the only time and place where the ballads fit to the political history. And when historians realize this, they set out the task of finding the real Robin Hood. So, like me, it's written in this one piece that's early Robin Hood that they started connecting the dots too. And this is where they started transforming that story to be the story of Robin Hood and all of this info, except for nobody knows why they picked Sherwood, except for maybe it just sounded better, they say. Okay, so from this period in the medieval archives today, if you want to track down um, um, people today, you would be looking you'd Google it. Well, back then, they basically, if your name, let's say, was Robinson's, okay, you would be bound basically to be a Robinson, okay, and it was this was difficult for me to kind of figure out, but this is the church rolls, the church records in early Middle Ages. So Karen, if you're a Fahey, you would be Fahey from Pennsylvania. Okay, they wouldn't really mention your name. It would be Fahey. So it was really odd that they would use Robin Hood, and they were thinking at the time that Robin Hood was one word, and that's basically he was of the Robin Hoods. So does that make sense? Or even Mary, it would be Tyndall of Ohio. That's where Mary lives. So, and I would be, Holder of Arkansas. And so back then there were so few that's how they did it. And if let's say you would have brothers and sisters, then they would do the same thing. Or then they would call by the first name. So there was no indexes, and there was no written down in alphabetical order, nevertheless. The only way historians really had to look into any of these stories, and I believe this is why King Arthur was lost, with the round table, because we even put that back to about 1,000 or even 1200, 1300. Looks like more back to 1000 century, right about there. And they just didn't write things down. They wrote it on stone, but it didn't really last, or they wrote it on paper and it didn't make it. And so this is why I believe we have a hard time with going back the same way as Robin Hood, go back and find King Arthur and the Round Table. And so, well, the historians were looking for Robin. Um, the earliest 14th century, they did find one in the court rolls of Manor of Wakefield in the reign of Edward II, living with his wife Matilda, um, which was the tenant called Robert Hood. See, and the most of uh, the people, that's not Robin Hood, but that's a totally different name. But Robin is the nickname for Robert, and this was in the 14th century where they were able to find it in the petroglyphs. Not really petroglyphs, it was just written in stone. Don't let me confuse you. In pottery and carved into some of the glass or the, boy, let me get this right. Um, they would write it into the stone. They would write it on the castle walls of who owned what. And then, of course, all the knights were listed. So for many years, the name Robin was used instead of Robert, just like, for an example, Jack might be a nickname. So we do find out that it wasn't, it was the 12th and 13th century where they were using the last names. And then when you go into the 14th century, like it just said, then they started using the name. So let's suppose for a moment that the real name is of Robin is Robert Hood. Um, and he was a Lancastrian rebel. And he was an outlaw after they say the rebellion. And so he also lost his property there. So this Mr. Hood, the house of Bitchel, and today is the site of a bus station. So um, I was like, oh, well, a bus station is not going to help me. So he did live somewhere in the area of 1322, which goes right back to that same Robin Hood we were just talking about. And we don't hear of him again after right about 1327 to 1340. And so I almost thought that maybe that's when he died. But the ballot says that he was taken to the king's service after 15 months. And so basically, we find out close to 1340s, 1370s, right about there, there's this Robin Hood that was in the king's service, remember, as a servant. And so basically, we find out we could have, someone could have the dates wrong, and it could have been closer to 1950. And so when I looked into, and this happens a lot with archaeology, people will write down what they think the date was, and then it just gets passed on, and then you get wrong dating. And um, so this Robin Hood, he was a bodyguard who appears on the payroll at Edward's court at 1323. So then it goes right back into the 1300s. So this other one, Robert Hood, doesn't really match, except for him, not only him, but the earlier Robin Hood actually had a wife, Matilda. So we got two Robin Hoods with two different dates. One being would make him really old, one making him right about the right age, with a wife named Matilda. Now, could Matilda, this Robert Hood of Wakefield, um, and being married to a Matilda, they said it could have changed, that Matilda was kind of um, a back then it would have been like a corny, nerdy name. And so they could have changed it over to Marion, because Marion was considered a royalty. It was considered one of those names that all the women wanted to have back then. So, um, um, so anyway, and I'll get to Beth here in a second because I got something to tell you guys here. So, could these two men be the same person? Is what I'm thinking. In the forest of Barnesdale, they say there's a Papelwick church in Sherwood. There's a medieval forester grave that gives an idea of uh, now, when I went and looked, they showed this grave, and a it's got a arrow hanging on it, and it almost looks like it's a Christian type of Christian cross, but without the cross going across. But it almost looks like a sword, a beautiful sword. And so there's a bow and arrow on this, and um, it's outside of a church, so it really made a lot of sense that this really could have been the grave. They say it's the grave of Robin Hood, and but it's all by itself. It's way far away from everywhere else in the graveyard. So um, so now we're kind of looking at the fact that well, get this, it was buried under one of the biggest oak trees. Um, and not only that, but they said when the oak tree had to come down, they replanted another one in honor of Robin Hood's grave there. So everybody's basically keeps saying over time that this grave belonged to this Robin Hood. It doesn't have no markings, no names. It's just that's what has been told. And so now we are looking at this is basically a good possibility. Now, when we looked into Matilda, we find that Matilda was part of a royal, not really royalty, but her family owned a lot of land. And of course, she was considered a maid. She was um, she was a virgin. So she was basically the Virgin. She was called the Virgin Matilda, and they say that they did this Robin Hood and this Matilda did get together. They did get married, and so we have the bad sheriff, and we got the king, but with the wrong name. It's King Edward. And now get this, he also came earlier on when we find the early history of this Robin Hood, where he was a part of that king that was bad and he got away from it. Well, you start what the historians are saying in some of these articles is that this could be the Robin Hood. And so they went further into looking into if it's Robin Hood, Matilda. Matilda did have not marry men, but guards because of the wealth that her folks had. And so basically, they said it all boils back down to Barnesdale. And so when they looked into Barnesdale and they looked around, they did find that it did date back to the 1300s, and it did have rebels in the forest there. That there was stories written from Barnesdale with a robin and with men, it says, and that basically they ended up living out in Greenwood, which is basically really close to all of this. Now, if you look at where Nottingham's at, and you look at where Barnesdale's at, it's over here, and then everything else is over um, not Sherwood Forest, but where they would hide. And so if you have Nottingham here, they could go either direction out of the city to hide if they robbed. Now, what we did find out, this real Robin Hood that we're thinking, he was an outlaw during the summer, and then he'd sneak back home with his wife Matilda in Wakefield in the winter. But every outlaw needs his gang. So basically, um, Robin Hood with the records, we found basically the one that lived in Wakefield in 1322, and he fled the forest to Barnesdale. We also find versions of the merry men that could have been a league with Robert Wakefield. And so we have Little John that we mentioned. Well, it ended up being um, a Will Scarlet. And so his name really wasn't Little John, it was Will Scarlet. Now, remember Friar Tuck? That is also a name that it comes up, it's just not associated with Robin Hood. So, um, where else did we see any of these names? Um, we saw it, basically, it was, remember the well? There is names on the well, supposedly. I looked pretty close at it, at the picture, and I just couldn't see nothing carved on it. But it basically says, him, his men, and they say there wasn't this great big group of them. There was three. There was um, Will Scarlet and two others, and like I said, they were Matilda's um, protection for her and her family. But it looks like basically the three ended up together in the woods. Now, did they live out in the woods and camp? And no, no, they had a house. They had a house, and supposedly they went on to maybe having a son. Now get this. This is what's really weird. When you look into the history, their first son was named John. So, and they were calling him Little John or Baby John. So this could be where they saw Little John and decided to change Will Scarlet over to Little John. Or they say there's a possibility when his son got older that was the Little John, and that he was just he would have added to the others. Um, so basically, we did find him, and it is Robin Hood of Wakefield. And of course, we also see that he was part of St. Mary's in York. And we find out his wife, whose name was Matilda, not Marion. So it basically, he wasn't really a villain in the story. He just robbed. And back in those days, they said the earliest versions of the story, that basically you had sometimes to rob from them because they were overtaxing, and the kings were very cruel. And if you didn't want to be a part of the kingdom and be a servant, which they said caused a lot of depression, uh, being a servant and work under a harsh king, it was better that you just fled to the forest. And that's what it seems like this Robin Hood did. And so, so Robin and Marion, the characters, uh, basically go for a better story. And of course, she's the maid, and actually, she wasn't a maid; she was just a virgin, with very rich parents. Now, my thing was, did he rob her parents and steal her? I never did find anything on that, but it did say that he did eventually. Okay, towards the end of his life, he eventually did started robbing the rich, and he did give to the poor, but also did um, Matilda's family started giving vegetables and extra meat to the countrymen, they say. So he went from a bandit to a nobleman, and in Tudor times. And of course, it just makes for a wonderful story. And um, so, what basically in 1598 or 99, it says they did an Anthony Monday's play. Um, and it was the downfall of Robert Earl of Huntington, and it was the death of him. And basically, that is changed the name to Robert of Wakefield. It ended up being Robin of Sherwood, and Matilda was changed to Marion. So there we have it. And 15, um, basically 1500, it changed to the story that we all know. But there was Robin Hood is real. He is real, and so there you have it. So now, when you see Kevin Costner, Karen, you know that it's actually a true story. It just wasn't set in Sherwood Forest. It was close to Nottingham, but realized that he was very vicious to begin with. And I believe that was only for the king. And then when he got away from the king and then he got on his own and he met his wife, I think that's when things started changing. And of course, we know that uh, it wasn't merry men, it was just men of protection. And we knew he was a beautiful archer. We knew that he was spot on and he was the best in that valley. That is basically in history that's been noted, that this Robert Wakefield, um, was the best in the valley, they say. So now Mercedes is in here. I don't know if she might get upset at me. Mercedes is my granddaughter, and she came over a couple days ago and she showed me a beautiful ring. Yes, she surprised us that she's engaged. Um, Her and her boyfriend or fiance now have been together for a very long time. So the wedding not too soon. It's going to be. Um, she said it's going to be a while from now. So Beth, you might have to get some. We get closer. We will have to let you know. Uh, so anyway, the other thing is tomorrow. Tomorrow's going to be real different for everybody. I will have um, the morning show will be the earthquakes and weather. I'm going to do a little bit of news with it. I have to pick my sister up tomorrow, and so there won't be a news show. So Karen, you get to sleep in. Now, if I can possibly get the if you guys want to watch, you're going to have to get up at 5, 6 in the morning when I do a live show, but it will be there for you guys to watch later on. And then Wednesday we'll have the two shows again. I have got for those interested in the Clinton series I'm doing. Um, I was looking through a lot of these documents, and I found a lot. I found a CIA package, and oh boy, wait till you guys hear about this CIA stuff. Um, so yeah, so we're looking at a wedding. I hope you guys uh, have a wonderful day in the morning. I will have a show, but it's going to be really early. Heck, William might be up for that. Uh, but it will be out there, and you guys can go back and watch it. And then if we get back early enough, I'll go ahead and do a show tomorrow night. But I'm not real sure, so I don't want to promise and not be able to keep up with it. But my sister will be coming to stay with us for a while. I'm hoping I'm going to kidnap her for a week so she can be here for my grandbaby's birthday on the 21st. So we're going to have fun, me and my sister. And you probably see her. I'm going to try to get her on camera with me. And we're going to have a really nice visit. But unfortunately, I got to drive to Memphis tomorrow to get her. So it's about 3 hours and 3 hours back. So that's most of the day we'll be driving. Um, but anyway, folks, that is the story of Robin Hood. Um, Next week, I'm kind of flipping a coin whether it's Medusa or Merlin. I'm not real sure. I seen this when I was looking up Robin Hood. There was this awesome story about Merlin. I was like, "Ooh, yeah, Merlin would be cool." I did a little bit on Merlin a while back, but all those shows were taken off YouTube when they took my channel. So, with that, folks, I hope you guys all enjoyed the story of Robin Hood. And just remember, In the morning, you'll just find the video. It'll be the weather, the earthquakes, the fun pet stories, and I'll have a little bit of news with it, top news. Uh, Not much is going on except for we're all mad at the politicians, both sides of us. We're all fed up with the gas prices. So subscribe definitely over in Facebook. Hit your follow button and share the shows. We do Legends of Myths and Monsters on Mondays, and then we have corruption files. We have military reports, news, and the fun morning show. Um, and I'm really enjoying the morning show. I think a lot of people are. We're getting a lot of views, a lot of laughs, a lot of shares. And that's what we need in this time. We need a lot of smiles, a lot of laughs, uh, something to warm your heart. So with that, we will see everyone live again on Wednesday or tomorrow night if things work out. So with that, blessings to all of you, uh, from me to you. And, you know, just have a nice night, folks. Just have a nice night, and realize that, you know, we we're living in a rough time, but you know what? Yeah, sometimes you just got to look at the good in people. And I'm not saying politicians, but sometimes you got to look at the good at people. This is meant for someone out there. Um, don't keep looking how horrible people are, and maybe it's time for us to stop and just, once again, smile and say hello to a stranger that we don't know. So with that, see you on Wednesday, folks. Bye bye.